You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Hello, this is Trish, and the show we're going to look at today is the Twilight Zone. And welcome to Angelic Visions in the Night. As a child, like many kids, I was a fan of science fiction. H.G. Wells and the Time Machine and another one called The World Set Free were a couple of my favorite books. I bring these up because in the land of science fiction, in the 20th century, a lot has become science fact. So much so, I started to research it online, and there's just, I want to say oodles, but it sounds so bad, but there are just oodles of things. So I wrote some down. First off, in that book, The World Set Free, written by H.G. Wells, he predicted sliding glass doors in 1899. Sliding doors. Touch screens were featured in the Ender's Game. The desks virtually had touchscreen tablets on them. Video phones. There are television shows and movies of video phones for communication and for conferencing. 2001 Space Odyssey had video phones in them. And that was 1968. Star Trek featured a lot of things. And they also did video conferencing in 1966. Star Wars video conferencing, 1977. Now this is a great one. Metropolis, a film in 1927, featured video calling. Back to the Future in the 1980s. The Jetsons at the very beginning of the 60s, they also had a robot maid. Blade Runner with Harrison Ford, where he was hunting road cyborgs, and on and on. And one of the latest ones with my favorite actress, Scarlett Johansson, well, one of my favorites, had her being the voice for an AI companion in Her. Tractor beams are being tested right now in Australia. Now, they're not moving very big things and not very far, but they're working. Jules Verne wrote a book in 1865 called Earth to the Moon. 100 years later, and we were literally sending astronauts to the moon. There's a story about weapons that they use called an active denial system. They use it for crowd controls, where they shoot energy to stop people or to move crowds, and it works. I originally read a story online about this guy that was hiking with his friend, and they came to this area next to some sort of military base, and they started to get sick. They couldn't walk any further. They literally could not move forward in this one direction. When they backed up and moved the other way, they felt fine again. But they tested it a little while, and they tested the range. And he later found out about this active denial system and believed that he had stumbled onto something that was some sort of government project. So as you can see, and there are tons more. If you go online and type in science fiction that's become science fact, in entertainment, this is being featured all the time that actually turns into real life. So I could go on, but you're getting my point. And I always love science fiction. It was really my favorite, other than horror stories, of course. So the Twilight Zone, in particular, was written and created by a man by the name of Rod Serling. When I was younger, it was already into reruns. It's had actually a couple of lifetimes, but it started originally and ran from 1959 through 1964. But Rod Serling himself is a pretty interesting character. I love biographies. Rod Serling was born as part of the greatest generation, is what they called them. They were the people that grew up and fought in World War II. He was born December 25th in 1924 in Upper State, New York. When he was very young, he built a stage in his basement. His dad was kind of quirky too. During the Depression, he ended up having to work as a butcher, but he was an inventor. So you can imagine he was either hole up downstairs creating something, or he's very imaginative. But Rod Serling built a stage in their basement where he did plays with his brother Robert, who became a novelist. Whether they had other kids around or not, they just performed them down there. And during school, he was considered a class clown. He ended up being about 5'4", and in high school even tried out for the varsity football team, but of course they told him he was too small. But he was a scrapper from the start. He was interested in writing and radio early. But at 19, it was 1943, so instead he enlisted in the Army and went and fought in World War II. He was sent to the Western Arena, which was very disappointing to him. He was a Jewish kid, and he wanted to go to Europe and fight Hitler. He must have gotten on somebody's nerves as he was going through basic training, because they put him on something they called the Death Squad. And the reason they called it the Death Squad is there was a high casualty rate, and he fought around the Philippines. He ended up getting 2 injuries, but he performed well enough that in the war he earned a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. And one of his injuries was in his knee, and it was reoccurring so much that his wife Carol said she got accustomed to his knee going out and him falling down the stairs. He used his GI Bill when he came home and went to school at Antioch. His first gig in radio, he volunteered at WNYC in New York as both an actor and a writer in the summer of 1946. In the next year, he worked at that station, but he got paid as an intern in his Antioch work-study program. So his first experience was in radio, and what he started doing is writing these scripts. He would just write these stories over and over again that were of things like death and time travel and space exploration. He ended up getting a job eventually his first job was in WKRC TV in Cincinnati. And he included writing these testimony advertisements for dubious medical remedies like snake oil. But he finally got recognized enough, and he wrote these scripts for Kraft Television Theater. And he wrote so many scripts, he would just, when he got turned down by one place, he'd redo it a little bit and send it off to another place. He ended up getting a lot of them published that way. One of his first episodes was called Patterns, and it was at that time where his life completely changed. And he said he and his wife went out for a date, and they had 2 little girls, and they got a babysitter, and they had just moved to town. He said, "You don't have to worry, we don't have a phone, and we're not going to need one for years." The first bit where he put the phone in the house, it started ringing, and he said it didn't stop for years. And Patterns was the first show. He had 3 things that he fought against while he was alive. It was censorship, racism, and war. When he got into the early years of television, sponsors were often working as editors and censors, so they would send back his stuff all the time of what he could say and what he couldn't say on national television. The Twilight Zone started October 1959, and CBS picked it up. Now, I was just watching these episodes, and some years there would be like 36 episodes, which is unheard of now. There were a few, it was 18. When I was coming of age in the regular 3-channel programming, there was usually about 22, 23. I picked out a couple in the first season that I really liked, but I have watched The Twilight Zone these 4 years so often that I recognize a lot of the episodes over and over again. The first one is the very first one, and it's called Where Is Everyone? The Twilight Zone was composed of things like how we deal with our fears. There were many episodes about dealing with death, also time travel, time loops, and space exploration. But the first one, Season 1, Episode 1, is called Where Is Everyone? Now, this character by the name of Mike Ferris walks into an empty town. You just see him coming into town. He looks like he's wearing a military outfit. Yeah, a military outfit, but it's not a uniform. It looks more like workman's clothes. It's a jumpsuit. And he's talking to himself. It was played by Earl Holliman, which became famous. That is another thing I loved about this show. It's part of that 60 thing where beginning actors got their starts on these shows. Character actors, of course, did the same thing. They'd play Perry Mason and then come over to the Twilight Zone. So it has that same sort of feeling where you see them over and over again. Earl Holliman, however, was already a seasoned veteran and had won a Golden Globe while he starred in a movie with Burt Lancaster and Katharine Hepburn, and he played their son, and he won a Golden Globe for it. It's called The Rainmaker in 1956. He also did a stint in the 70s on Policewoman with Angie Dickinson. He also was a singer and would sing like the blues, Nobody Knows How I Feel, Don't Get Around Much Anymore. He was a stage actor also in like musicals like Oklahoma. So he had a varied career, but he played this first episode as Mike Ferris, this military-looking man who walks into this completely empty town. And kind of the bite, I loved watching. He walks into this restaurant. He wants to get some breakfast. He has like $2.85 in his pocket. And that's enough to get him coffee and a good breakfast. But nobody's there. Nobody is there. So he keeps walking. And he finds this mannequin. He starts talking to this mannequin that sort of falls over next to him. I don't really want to tell the endings of the shows because they're really great to watch. And I watch them on Paramount Plus. Not a plug for it, but that's where I watch them. You can watch many of these on YouTube, actually, and they're all in black and white. And the season of the first year, the second episode of Season 1 is also really good. It stars a man by the name of Ed Wynn. He's kind of a character actor, and he plays a guy named Lou Bookman. Now, Lou Bookman has this little suitcase that he lives in the city, and he carries it around and he sets it up. It turns into a stand, and he sells all kinds of odds and ends, tape and sewing kits and needle and thread, like just a ruler, odds and ends to people walking by, anything they might need. He calls himself a pitchman. This one night, he's got his little stand-up, he's pitching to kids, and he's talking to people, and this man walks up to him and says, "It's time to go." And he said, "Are you Death?" And he said, "Yes, I'm Mr. Death." And he said, "Well, I'm not ready." And he said, "Well, what's it going to take for you to be ready?" So he tells him he needs a spectacular pitch, like this ultimate pitch to somebody, and that's what he calls himself. He's a pitchman who sells his little wares out of this suitcase on a stand. And so throughout the night, he's talking to people, he's giving away things, he's doing his shtick, his thing that he normally does. And finally it comes along where he makes this pitch. So I'm going to leave it again there because this one's pretty predictable. But the whole story is about his few hours talking to this Mr. Death and making peace with the life that he's led. After watching these episodes again, I looked at them in a different way, but you can see movies out of these. Literally, there are movies made out of these. The Langoliers, I believe that is from The Invaders, the episode called The Invaders in Season 3. It's Season 2, 1961. Shadowplay is a prisoner on death row, put to death over and over again, similar to The Edge of Tomorrow. I think that's got Tom Cruise in it. Little girl lost falls into a portal in her bedroom with her little dog. Poltergeist, 1982. Persons or Persons Unknown in 1962 is The Forgotten. And over again, there's even one with a living doll that kills you called Taki Tina if she doesn't like you in 1963. That is similar to Child's Play's Chucky in 1988. And The Arrival again is similar, about a plane that lands, though the premise is different. But the plane that lands reminds me of the Langoliers. However, in this, The Arrival is the name of the episode. It is an empty plane that flies in, and it's a psychological kind of twist for the person that it's meant for. Where in the Langoliers, it is the airport where these people are trapped in this sort of empty environment. But there was enough of it that I went, this reminds me of that. The Invaders in 1961 is similar to Signs, where this family fights off these aliens. Signs in 2002 has Mel Gibson and his family fighting off the aliens. There are some famous actors that appear in this show over the years. Robert Redford, William Shatner, Cloris Leachman, George Takei, Roddy McDowall, Burgess Meredith from Rocky, Don Rickles, the comedian, Jack Klugman from The Odd Couple in Quincy, Elizabeth Montgomery, who ended up in Bewitched a few years later. She plays in season 3, episode 1, called Two. It is about two people that are left in the world after a Holocaust. Then there's Peter Falk, who becomes Columbo, Lee Marvin, famous actor, Carol Burnett, Rod Taylor, Russell Johnson, who becomes the professor on Gilligan's Island, and Robert Duvall, just to name a few of them. Rod Serling loved a twist in his plots. And in season 1, episode 14 is something called Third from the Sun. The first one is Will Sturka, who works at a military base making H-bombs. He is a scientist. And one day he goes to work and he's having a cigarette. I love to see filterless cigarettes on TV during this time. Anyway, he's outside smoking a cigarette, and this man walks up to him and starts talking to him, and he said, 48 hours. He believes in 48 hours. It's coming. It's really coming. And he continues on while Sturka's smoking. I bet the military is getting set up. Yep, it's going to happen, I bet. And he talks to him and asks him what, and he said, well, there's a whoosh, up and over, whammo. And there goes the enemy. And Sturka says, well, then what happens here? And he says, oh, probably something similar. He said, you mean whoosh, up, over, and whammo? Said, yes, but with far less accuracy, far fewer. And the scientist says something else to him, and he says, you better mind what you say. And he said, I guess I'd better mind what I think, too. He said, you'd better. So he goes home to his family that night, and he's sitting with his daughter, and he's talking to his neighbor, and he starts talking to him. And they come up with this plan to steal this experimental spacecraft and go look for a place to live that's inhabitable for their families. It's a wonderful episode. All of these, I think, could have podcasts on the episodes alone. Anyway, this is first season, episode 14. Rod Serling loves his twists, and there's one at the end. His plots are about humanity and how they deal with unexpected twists in their life, like getting your biggest wish and having it go horribly wrong. The show is over in 1964, but comes back in 1969 with similar stories, a little more modern, in something that Rod Serling, it's called Rod Serling's Night Gallery. Rod Serling afterward taught as well as continued on with other important issues. He was an anti-war activist, and he also fought for racial equality. In 1971, he had a heart attack. Those cigarettes, he was smoking 3 to 4 packs of them a day. And he was sent to the hospital, but a few weeks later he had another heart attack. So they decided to do open heart surgery. And as they were performing open heart surgery, he had a third heart attack and he passed away. He died June 26, 1971. He was only 50 years old. The Twilight Zone was on television on CBS from 1959 through 1964. After his death in 1971, it came back and was revamped in 1985 through 1989. It also came back on CBS and then went into syndication. Again, in 2002 to 2003, it was featured on UPN, a cable network. And finally, in 2019 to 2020, it was featured on CBS again. There was a feature film that went into theaters called The Twilight Zone in 1983. The original program was canceled more than once. In 1962, they couldn't find a sponsor. In those days, the show had a sponsor. Rod Serling wrote 92 episodes of the program, and by the end, he was experiencing severe burnout. Rod Serling said he was losing perspective on his writing and what was good and what was bad. He said, "You argue, you fight, you try to protect what has been written, but you're battling networks, advertising agencies, sponsors, and pressure groups. I've been forced to make concessions in every television play I've ever written." Today, I was looking over the streaming series of science fiction programs, and there are so many. But I really believe it began with him. It began with his show, The Twilight Zone, that had us look at death, our own humanity, our fears, the space program and aliens, and it started there. These programs today are in bright color with CGI and graphics he could have only dreamed of. But he left an incredible legacy, and his shows are still watched and enjoyed. And as the seasons progressed, they got quirky, the plots were quirky. He made incredible contributions and helped create an entire genre that is so popular today. And I think that's it for me with this one. I'm a little sentimental because it is one of my favorites from childhood. So thank you, and we'll be back again with the second part, The X-Files.